because I have a sort of a gut level response to anyone saying boundaries that is sort of like annoyed, maybe. I feel like it gets used so often as a defense. So it was helpful to me to look at those and to start thinking of boundaries as something that are in the interest of safety. And then like try to think of how safety interacts with creativity.
I don't even know if it's an assumption, but I think I sometimes lose track of the fact that some people are operating from a place where a lack of a sense of boundary can be really problematic, right? Especially if there is any kind of power differential in a relationship. So I try to remind myself to sort of, when I talk with folks about boundaries, to sort of start by reminding myself and them that I think, boundaries in part are about safety and are about, all the things. So, most of my work's in education, and I'm not saying there should be no boundaries. I'm not saying that teachers should date students. I mean, it's not that, right? I'm sort of starting from a place of we're in ethical relationship with each other. I know that Judy talks a lot about boundaries as a place of meeting, and she and I have talked about this, and she would always pause and say, of course, boundaries in the more conventional sense are important because it is a source of protection, particularly for anyone with less power in a relationship. Beyond that, though, she loves to talk about boundaries as a place of meeting. I think inherent in that is that both people, particularly the person with more power, need to have role clarity. The role clarity allows me as a teacher, for example, to be clear that even if I'm enjoying a wonderful connection with a student or a difficult moment with a student, I'm still a teacher in the life of that student. And I have certain roles and responsibilities in that relationship that the student doesn't have, and that I can't really let go of in the course of these interactions and relationships. And the same would be true for a therapist, obviously, that regardless of what's going on in that space, you want to hold on to the clarity of your role and your purpose there, and probably some of the responsibilities that you carry for that space and in relation with that person. And so I think that's what's important to hold on to. So when both people have that clarity, and I would say it's probably important for the person with more power. So in my case, the professor, I need to be really cognizant of this. I don't know that students are always as consciously aware, though I think often it's just in there for them. But once we have that role clarity, then we can do what Elizabeth Holloway, so she's a friend, a colleague, and a research partner, what we talk about as working close to the boundary. So similar to the way that Judy talks about it as a place of meeting. And so it is by virtue of my clarity of my role as a teacher that I can then work closer to the boundary because I have that clarity. So, Alison Tom is someone whose work I read many years ago that really shaped my thinking on boundaries. And she talks about often when people teach adult students, historically, there have been some faculty who err on one extreme or the other. So they're either so concerned about either boundary violations or accusations of boundary violations that they pull so far back that they can't have that relational connection that that I would argue you need to be a good teacher in many cases. Or they sort of imagine, I'm teaching adult students, there's no boundary here, like we're all co-learners. And that is a huge disservice to students, because if you're assessing their work, there is a power differential. And if you don't, if you put students in a place of needing to sort of play along with this idea that there's no power differential, I think that's really problematic for students. It puts them in an untenable position. Anyway, so Alison talks about not being too far on one extreme or the other. So I think the point is that when we have that role clarity, then we can meet in sort of that sweet spot where we can engage deeply with each other. And there is no danger of misuse of power or manipulation or anything like that. So I would also suggest that it's not sort of a once and done. It's not like once I get that role clarity, like it's all just good to go. Like I probably need to continue to reflect on that and be mindful. I mean, in my case, relationships with students, I teach doctoral students, and, those relationships shift a little bit over time, right? It's going to be a little bit different with a brand new student who I'm just getting to know than it would be with a student who I'm supervising in their dissertation work, who I've gotten to know, and they're becoming more able to sort of take the lead on their own research. I mean, that relationship shifts a little bit over time. So I may need to, I need to reconsider this. Again, it's not something I figure out once and then I'm just all set. But But I think that idea of the clarity is what allows us to then work more closely, for me, feels very important.
I had just landed on a sentence that was clarity and connection creating safety, that was following a sentence about like a more traditional thinking on boundaries. Out of my safety zone, do I need to look at my strategies of disconnection, or do I need to look at creating more safety and clarity in this relationship?
I think that being able to work close to the boundary, that's a space of tremendous potential for creativity. And I would suggest that sometimes there's an intimacy to that. And of course, I don't mean a romantic or sexual intimacy, but there's a sort of intellectual, emotional intimacy to that can happen if I'm really clear on my role. That takes us to a space, I think, that allows for wonderful creativity, both on the part of the student and me. And I sort of imagine, again, it's the same in other domains. It's the same in leadership. It's similar in therapy and so on. Of course, there are different dynamics going on in each of these contexts, but I imagine there's some parallel about when, because that's the place where you can be more fully present, right? And you can take risks. And the other thing is, I think we can bring more of our authentic selves to that space. And that's something else that allows for creativity. So back to the point, though, that you were just making, if I understand, so you're saying that when you notice that you are engaging in some of your strategies of disconnection, it makes you stop and think, do I need to look at boundaries? Do I need to look at what's going on here? Do I need to look at whether the space feels safe? So did I hear that correctly?
Yes. Yeah. Because sometimes it is just my own baggage that's getting in the way. And if I can like take a minute to notice that I'm like feeling reactive, then I can either like mindfully override that feeling, like say, okay, I hear that. I am not gonna follow that, but I hear it. Or say, oh, something's going on here that I need to look at.
If I am noticing that I am disconnecting in some way, or that I feel unsafe, then I'm not going to be fully present. And sometimes there are really good reasons for that, right? Because I'm sensing that I am not safe in this moment in whatever way that means. And so my first order of business probably is to sort of figure that out. And is it something I need to work through with myself? Is it something external to me that I need to address? I might need to shift. I might need to get to a safer place, whatever. So I think all of that is true. And then in those moments when that's not happening and we're able to just be more fully in the moment, I mean, that's when we can get into flow, right? So presence and authenticity can allow for us to get into that flow state, which can be such a creative place. But I think you're right. I mean, if someone is in a relationally unsafe place, that's not going to be a place for creativity.
The other idea that I wanted to make sure we touched on while we were talking about boundaries, that I always find so useful, is the idea of stating rather than setting. Because I think of stating a boundary as something that is about my capacity right now and is impacted by the relationship and the moment, both. And setting as something that I might do outside of the relationship or in advance or to somebody else. Like there's more separation for me with the setting than the stating, I guess.
Also, setting to me sounds more permanent and fixed.
And
stating seems like something that you're doing, like you said, it's more contextual. It's more in the moment. It's in reaction to what's going on or in response to what's going on right here and right now. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I like that. This may be more the conventional use of thinking about boundaries, but I know for me, if I'm going to engage in creative work, I do need to set some boundaries about carving out the time for that work and the headspace for that work. That's the kind of boundary setting that I think can sound sort of more firm and protective, but I guess what I'm thinking is that maybe some of that's really okay, because I'm not going to have the time and headspace and energy to write if I don't essentially set some boundaries around when I'm available to people, what I'm going to take on, and those sorts of things. So, obviously somebody raising little kids is going to have a lot less choice about being available to others than someone who doesn't have kids, or kids are out of the house or whatever. So
one of my strategies of disconnection is people pleasing, right? So if I'm going like, oh, sure, I don't mind, let's spend all evening doing this, when really I know that I need some space, then I'm not being authentic, and I'm not able to like fully represent myself there.
I hadn't thought about the sort of strategy of disconnection in relation to as a response to not having the time and space one needs. I was thinking of it differently, but yeah, sort of can make it hard to get off the treadmill, right?
Yeah, yeah, because you don't want to let anyone down. Like, I don't want anyone to go away sad.
Right. Right, right, right. Yeah.